Hi, and welcome to episode 14 of the Mouthwash Talk Show. And yes, we are live on Facebook, and we welcome your questions in the live chat. And we have yet another great show for you this evening. And I got another special deal for you tonight. I actually went out and did the peeps on the streets, and you'll have to stay tuned to listen to why I had to go do that, because I'm sure you're going to believe the excuse that I came up for Thomas. We have some good guests tonight. We have first up, we have Mark Small, and he'll be joining us after the peeps in the streets here in just a few minutes. And we're going to talk about the corporate setup of these two political parties. And then we're going to bring the panel on. There are going to be a couple questions. And then we're going to bring on our main attraction, Andrew Horning. He is a constitutionalist and he knows a lot of words. That's all I'm going to say about that. And he will be breaking it down for us about the two-party system and what's good, bad, and ugly about it. So I don't want to, hold anything up, because we have such a great show lined up, and I know you can't wait for the conspiracy theory. That's going to be a good one tonight. And I know you can't wait. So let's get started with the peeps on the streets, and let's roll that beautiful tape. This is John Schmitz, and I'm filling in for Thomas Breedlove, who's on assignment in Israel. He's covering the Palestinian and Israel conflict. And I think last time I talked to him, he was getting bombed at a bar in Tel Aviv. No, not just kidding, but I am filling in for Thomas today, and I have the peeps on the streets. All right, what do you think about the two political parties? Okay, how about, do you think the two political parties work for the people?
No, I don't know.
No, you don't know? How about this? Do you think the two political parties are for insiders only?
No.
No, it's for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think the two-party political system works for the people?
To be honest, nah, I really think it's a one-minded thing, you feel me? So I feel like it should be one boss, if anything.
Okay. How about, do you think that the parties are made for political insiders, for the people that are in the parties?
Like the insiders, yeah, like I feel like they got a system where they work for themselves, you feel me, to please themselves, benefit us. Nah, we gotta, you feel me, we gotta like, how do I put it, you feel me? We gotta be, let's say, like rich, you feel me? You gotta have a face to be known, like, who is this kid, you feel me, for real?
Yeah, so in other words, for people like you and I, it's probably no bueno, right?
Nah, you feel me?
All right, thanks.
But you a little different, though.
Yeah. Do you think the two political parties work for the people?
No.
How about, do you think that the two political parties are only for insiders only?
Well, of course.
Okay. And sir, do you think the political parties, the two-party system works for the people?
Yeah.
Yep. And do you think the leadership of the two-party political system are for insiders only?
Yeah, that too.
All right. Thank you very much. And that's a wrap for the peeps on the streets, and I'll be sure glad to have Thomas Breedlove, the Indianapolis skateboard journalist, back next week. How'd you like the one guy there, Mark, that said, you're different?
Yeah, I didn't trust the guy that didn't say anything because he was wearing a Cardinals shirt.
Yeah, I don't know. I think what he was thinking about a different kind of party. I don't know, but that's okay. So, Mark, how are you doing this evening?
Doing okay. Looking forward to this. I was looking forward to having more of a conversation with Andy Horning, and we did briefly before the show came on, and I look forward to that in the future.
Yeah,
I always enjoy talking with you, John.
And it's only an hour show, so there we go. Well, we're bringing you on. I mean, you're going to be with us next week. Our topic next week is going to be abortion, and you are going to take the side of pro-choice. And we'll have John Jacobs on, and he is definitely a pro-life guy. And I've got some tough questions for both of you. But tonight we're going to focus on the two-party system, and we've talked in the past about the corporate structure of the two parties. Go ahead and fill us in a little bit about what that might look like from a lawyer's and a legalistic standpoint.
Well, it's really weird because the two parties are not-for-profit corporations. There was a law review article written in 1996 by Professor it was a Cornell Law Review, I think, published it, where he said they're not-for-profit corporations, so you can't buy shares, and they're not subject to a lot of the regulations that other corporations would be. But they have free speech rights because they're political actors. Now, if you look at, I was looking at the Republican Party here in Indiana, and I looked somewhat at the Democratic Party, but I was focused on the Republican Party for various reasons, one of which was I was running in the primary. They have articles of incorporation that are drawn up that really insulate the leadership of the party from any kind of accountability. That's basically a design that's being part of the plan for the two parties in the other 49 states. There was a case, Wilding versus Democratic National Committee out of the 11th Circuit out of Florida, where there was a challenge to the Democratic National Party along the same lines of, hey, you're accountable to us, we should have some kind of input. Senators, people sued over the 2016 election. And that's what it boils down to. You have these corporations that are the political parties that you can't take over. You can't buy shares and buy into them. The Indiana Republican Party is actually the Indiana Republican State Committee. And I tried to get a copy of the bylaws to figure out how you get onto that state committee, couldn't get a copy of them. So my problem is this: you have democratic values in our society where you're supposed to be able to vote in and out of office the people that are running things, but those people are writing the rules that prevent people from putting them out of power. So if they're going to do that as a corporate entity, because you got to have a corporate entity to do business, you're either a sole proprietorship, partnership, or a corporate entity. You could have limited liability corporations and LLPs, basically those three things. Well, to do business, well, there should be some kind of different twist on a corporate entity that's a political party so that people can make it accountable. Otherwise, they've got authority and they're not accountable to anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, what would be a solution for that? What would you put in place for that? More openness, more transparency? How would that look?
Well, you'd have to have some in there. You're walking a very fine line on First Amendment, because you're telling a political organization how it's going to run, and yet it's running its own thing, so it can't be taken over. Look at it this way: in 2010, when the Tea Party people were taking over the Republican Party here, that was under this corporate kind of entity, but they were really just primarying people. They really weren't taking over the party itself. So it's like you have to have some mechanism by which people can vote in and out of office, the actual people running things. As it is, they don't vote in and out of office the people that are running the parties.
Oh, I get that now. So basically they have no reason to do anything differently or impress anybody or do anything that others want, because they cannot be removed unless they remove themselves.
You got it.
All right. Well, hey, Mark, that's a great explanation. I'm going to go ahead and bring the panel on now, and they're going to have a question for you. So let's see here. We're going to start with Ed, hopefully. And we got to do this. Hold on. There we go. You go there. I go there. Oh, look at me go. Engineer of the Year. All right. So we're going to start reverse order this time. Usually we start with Ed. And since this is his third show, he's a veteran of the show. He is our left, other than you, Mark. You're a left person. But he's going to go for the record of being able to make it 8 shows or more as the left side. So we're going to give him a break. We're going to let him bat cleanup tonight. We're going to start with Jacob. Jacob, do you have a question for Mark?
Yes. So I guess, Mark, what would you say is the most effective way that people could really take on the two-party duopoly in a practical manner if they want to make some substantial change? Do you think, like, as you said, is there any ways to really reform the party from the inside out? Or if people want to bring about any reform, do you think forming third parties is a good solution, or joining third parties? Like, what is the best way to really take this issue head on? considering that, like you said, the special interests are so entrenched in the two parties.
Well, look, it's not just special interests. It's like the professional people who've been there all their lives in that party. So they're insulated. But two things. One, do you take it over from within? You can try to give you copies of the rules. Do you run against one? I know Lucy has in running as, a candidate for the Libertarian Party. They love third parties. They put so many hurdles in the way of independent candidates like John was. They put so many hurdles in the way of new parties. The irony in Indiana, if you have two major political parties, then you have a third party. Well, if you get enough votes to bump one of those two out from being one of the two major political parties, boom, you have another party in as one of the two major political parties. So it really doesn't do anything. I think that you have to attack from inside, you have to attack against, and the best way to do it is run for office, and all politics is local. And I'm sorry if that's ambiguous.
Well, I think it's a tough question, because how do you get rid of the emperor? And that's what it sort of seems like with these beyond the elected officials. You have the behind the scenes people, which there are quite a few of that you'll never hear their names. Okay, Lucy, here's your chance. Ask Mark anything. Well, not anything, but something about the corporate structure of the two political parties.
Oh, Lucy, you're muted.
Gosh, my husband wishes he had a mute button. So I'm curious, because you were unsuccessful trying to get the bylaws and kind of work and take them over from the inside. Does anyone in the general public, or someone who might be a card-carrying member of that particular party, would they have standing to create a lawsuit to demand transparency or representation?
Loudon versus DNC out of the 11th Circuit, Florida. No. They were trying to check off all the boxes to have plaintiffs suing to oppose what the Democratic National Committee done. So they got big donors, they got people who voted here, they got people who worked here, all across the board. No, they didn't have standing.
Dang.
Yeah.
So now we got to go the Godfather on him.
Every judge, every judge in every court in this state was appointed either by not by a libertarian, either by a Democratic, Republican, and confirmed that way. So they're going to have a national view of things in that way.
Yep. Okay, Ed, let's see what you have. I think Mark might be frozen a little bit there. There we go. He's back.
My question is, and one, I know you say you looked a little bit harder into the Republicans and the Democratic Party, but even with looking into them, the way that let's stay with the state legislature, the way that the rules are written there, where the majority kind of runs the House, how much of that also contributes to down the line? Because to me, almost if a libertarian wins, I'll take some, even in Washington, D.C., some of your independents, you still caucus with somebody. And so even if you do manage the breakthrough, how much of an advantage is that?
I think you stumped Mark.
I don't think it's very much of an advantage in terms of the elected offices reflected in leadership. Huh? No, I mean, when you look at the leadership of the parties, there's no accountability, there's no responsiveness to what happens in the elections. They're in the party, they're running the party. So there's no provision, for example, in the rules that says you get 11 members of the state house. That means you have 2 seats, state committee. There's nothing like that. The composition of the state committee determines how the party's going to be run. So I'm trying to find out who's going to be the on the state committee. I can't get the bylaws for it. So yeah, down the line in the legislature, some of that might be all fun and games, and that stuff are actually passed into law, but the party is actually run by people who are behind the mirrors.
Yeah, and I think that's what's a little bit frustrating with
that makes sense.
That's what's frustrating with the whole thing, because if what we don't know, and how do you find out? So, Mark, we could talk about this for a much longer time, I'm sure, but we're going to have to let you go so we can get to Andrew. And we're going to play our one sponsor here. And thanks for coming in. Everybody tune in next week and listen to, we're going to tackle a pretty tough subject. I've sort of been dodging for a while, but it just keeps popping up. And we're going to talk about abortion next week. And Mark's going to be on with John Jacobs, and it's going to be a good discussion. So let's hear this commercial, and then we'll be back with Andrew. Hey, everybody, we got new T-shirts. Look at this. Check it out. It's good. We got blue, and then we got yeller, and we got this here smiley face on the back side of it. So, hey, $20 covers shipping and handling. So get on it. Let's get your T-shirt ordered today. I would love to give out those T-shirts, but as the other cast members, the other co-hosts were saying, how much are we getting paid for this gig? And the same thing you're getting paid, Andrew. So and I would love to give the guests a shirt too, but we got to get this thing running in the black a little bit because it's just for fun, right? Just for fun. How are you doing tonight, Andrew?
Well, I'm doing well, and since you're talking about T-shirts and being in the black, like I got a black T-shirt. It's an
look at this!
The old cartoon I did years ago.
Dressed for success. So I have a feeling I've picked the right man for this conversation tonight. So
yeah.
We did the 5 o'clock somewhere little series we did about the Constitution back when technology wasn't as good as StreamYard, because we did the Zoom, and I had a heck of a time getting the volume right and all that. But hey, this looks pretty good tonight. It looks pretty professional, I think.
Yeah.
So hey, let's get right to it, and then we'll bring the panel on and for some Q&A. And let's see what has been your experience with the two-party system over the years. And I know you've been. Did you take your aspirin before?
Well, let's just jump right into where Mark Small left off.
Right.
One of those things that I wish we had a real concept about is that political parties, like corporations and governments and all that, they're abstractions. They're not real human beings. There isn't any, like one object you can point to and say that's a political party. And yet we have since like 1886 given human rights to these abstractions. And that is a fundamental problem that we really never even talk about. When Mark was talking about the odd way that they're organized, and that they have insulated themselves with all of these words that they're able to use as buffers. So when you incorporate, you're asking government to create this sort of like a fake human, and that you attribute human rights, like he was talking about the freedom of speech. Why does a corporation that doesn't even really exist anywhere except in our heads have human rights at all? And when you think about, the problem that most people have with corporations, and that it's so difficult to sue them, and it's so difficult to hold them accountable, and that they're not mortal like we are, and that they can, the CEO dies, and it's not like that he has to, there's like inheritance tax that has to be paid, and the whole thing gets divided up. There are huge advantages we have given to corporations that human beings don't have. And when we vote, we really should be aware of that, because there are two big things with this. First of all, because there is no human being that's actually this corporation, like Mark was talking about, they have this internal structure that is completely separated from what happens on election day. So you've got people that they don't particularly care who gets elected. They want a Republican or a Democrat to get elected because that's their modus operandi. But their power structure, their paycheck, their daily life has nothing really to do with that. So they do fundraising, they do all of these, the functions of a party, but they transcend these elections. So you've got politicians who lose their election, you've got politicians who get reelected, but these people stay in the background. And how do you affect them? The election doesn't affect them. They're not elected. They're not part of any sort of corporate structure where there's a board of directors that is accountable to shareholders. There isn't anything other than this nebulous idea that we think there's some ideology associated with the Democratic and Republican parties. But if you think about that for even 30 seconds, you realize that's not true, because they do basically the same thing with war and our money and debt and spending and all of that. And they've created, through their elected side of the operation, laws that protect them from any challengers. So only they can have precinct committeemen. Only they can be on election commission or the recount commission. Only they can, be in primary elections. And what's even more acutely interesting about this is when you've got constitutions that talk about human rights and that we're all supposed to be equal under the law, we're not. We're not at all. And so, you think about how the hierarchy in rights, they're basically like 6 different categories of human being when it comes to election day rights and, ballot access. So you've got the major political parties, which Mark talked about, that there's actually a term, major political party, and people call them MPPs or whatever. But there is by law, by code, not by constitution, by Indiana code, only 2. Why are there only 2? Because Democrats and Republicans decided there could be only 2. And then you've got this hierarchy where you have to get 10% of the vote in the Secretary of State's race if you want to have your candidates in the primary elections. If you get 2% of the vote in the Secretary of State's race, you can get permanent ballot access. And they have all these little markers where you get special treats if you can do certain things that maybe your party doesn't even care about, like the Secretary of State's race. It's not an ideological position that libertarians would particularly care about, except that it affects elections. And so if you're looking to see how all of this is put together, and I guess I should say too, this is mostly after World War II, almost entirely since the 1970s, in fact. We didn't even have primary elections before then. So if you're looking to see how this is not what the founders had in mind, our founders, in fact, warned us against this. This whole idea of having factions and political parties was, they were dead set against it. And it's recent. So people think that the 2-party system is like gravity, that it's always been there and that we need it and we'd fly off the planet if we didn't have it. But, none of that's true. So basically, everything that we think about political parties and, I was listening to your man on the street thing, and I can't help but get a little bit depressed thinking about what people don't know about their government. And they make these assumptions about how things work. And I was told, this is how a bill is written, and I saw the cartoons, and and this is how my government. No, it's not. It's just not at all. It's totally unfair. It's totally unconstitutional. Nobody really likes it, and it's not working.
Yeah, and these are things that you've experienced a lot of years of trying to break through this political logjam, and and I have tried myself, and there's nothing worse than getting both parties mad at you. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's one thing you can get solidarity in when they're going to, both of them are protecting their interest.
Well,
So,
political parties are inherently kind of a problem anyway. That the sort of tribalism idea. I always find it amusing when I hear Democrats talking about Republicans talking about Democrats. The Democrats like Republicans who speak out against their party. They say, that's a great Republican. Republicans say, that's a terrible Republican. You shouldn't be speaking out against your party. But then they love the Democrats who speak out against their party. And so, I've gotten myself in trouble for speaking out against the Libertarian Party. So this whole idea that you want the other guy to speak out about some other party, but not your own. No, that you have to protect this. And that abstraction of tribe, of, clan, is a very dangerous thing. It makes us, bend our principles. It makes us, think things that are not true. And it tends to make us think that, the facts that we see are not the facts that are. That, we believe what our party tells us. We believe what our side says. And that's historically, that's a scary thing.
Yeah, I see people just lining up no matter what it is, just because the other guy is for it. I mean, it just seems like the contrast is palpable. So people by nature want to belong to a group of things. Do you think this is one of the things the parties play on that human nature as far as keeping people involved in a party. If you're not one of the others, then you're nobody. I mean, we see that shaming happening in a lot of different issues, but how does that relate to parties?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, obviously they do take advantage of it, but I don't think it's even by design. I think that, I've long ago, having met an awful lot of people in charge with all of the major parties and having met lots of, elected people all the way up into deep into the federal level, there aren't smoky room geniuses. These are not like brilliant people coming up with brilliant ideas. We humans have a default state, and it's a bad default state. And it's really only by thought and diligence and carefully crafting ideas and plans that you get anything better than slavery or oppression, genocide, death. That's what humans do if we don't have better plans. And we rarely come up with better plans. And nobody's come up with a plan better than our constitutional rule of law. And yet we've trampled all of that stuff, and we've replaced it with pre-Hammurabi, make stuff up as you go along, and we're in charge and you're not. That basic idea of having the grand high poobahs and then different tiers of power without any legal. There's whatever words you say today will be forgotten tomorrow, because none of this stuff has to be written down. We make stuff up as we go, and we violate the laws that we write today. So this whole idea of law is actually kind of goofy when you think about how you're supposed to be able to, well, just as an example, the Indiana Constitution talks about free tuition, but you're supposed to have justice administered freely and without purchase, according to the Indiana Constitution. So in other words, your taxes should pay for everything that happens in a court of law. You shouldn't have to pay to file like a filing fee and have to pay for lawyers and all of this stuff. But because we have swept that aside, our courts are basically like an arms race, where the guy who carries the biggest money bags in is going to win. And if you're not, if you don't have the funding, if you're not part of the power structure, you will not have that standing, that elusive word, standing in a court. And that's just a sad thing that nothing that our founders had set in mind for us, and they actually put into a contract and signed it into our most fundamental law. None of that's actually in operation anymore.
Yeah. And it's like the famous philosopher George Carlin said, it's a club and we ain't in it. So here's a question from Spiro. He says, aren't the two parties actually two wings of the same bird? And then we're going to get to our panel after you answer that one.
Kinda. You got the good cop, bad cop thing going on for sure. So yes, and they really do have the same funding mechanism, with the exception of just a few special interest groups. So you've got the same military industrialists, the same financial services groups, the same big money and big spies, the same, when you think about espionage, finance, big industry, a lot of these guys give the same amount of money to both Democrats and Republicans because they don't care who wins. They just want to know that whoever wins is going to pick up the phone when they call. And they're going to write whatever little words they want to have inserted in these multi-thousand page bills. That's going to get in there. And so if you're looking to see who's in charge, the Democrat and Republican parties are marketing groups. They're not really in charge. They're just abstractions that are more or less the middlemen for the moneyed interests, who really do, as always, this is ancient history. They ran kings, they ran poobahs, they run our government, and that's by our choice. We vote for that, and it's a frustrating thing that during every election I've ever been in, I've always been like the underfunded candidate, and they say, well, you don't have support. And what does that mean? Why are we looking for that support? We know where that support comes from. We know that it comes with strings, and yet we vote for that anyway. And so, to answer your question, yeah, yes and no. I mean, they're basically competing marketing groups.
Yes.
And so they're not really the people in charge.
No, it is definitely that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring the panel on here. Let's see if we can get this together right. Okay, this is where that goes. We'll bring on Ed, Lucy, and Jacob. And Ed, you got a break on the first one, so go ahead and unmute and ask a question for Andrew, and let's see if he can answer it. I bet he can.
So let me say, just as even from the left, just amen, brother. I've loved everything you just said. I'm gonna have a flashback to last week, our conversation on the media and how much the media plays into it. Like you said, we've seen cartoons on how a bill is made that are nothing like how a bill is made. We also talked to our guest last week who said, hey, our local media, we just kind of stay out of politics. And part of me is like, when I talk to the average person, almost like, out on the street, they have no idea what's going on. And I'm like, the media really doesn't discuss this at all, or this topic doesn't get covered in our regular media. So I guess, what's your take on that?
Oh, I've been. You're touching a sore. You just picked a scab, buddy. When I was running as a libertarian for years and years and years, basically my biggest enemy was the media. And so you see, on the coverage of any campaign, they'd say, well, the Republicans said this, and then they have like 3 paragraphs, and the Democrats said this, and then they have 3 paragraphs. Also running as Andy Horning, some libertarian who really has no shot, and we don't know why he's in the election. And so. The idea that they've got this editing power over the choices on election day, and we've already been edited off the primary election ballot. It's like we've been granted, like they've deigned to allow us to be on the general election ballot, but the media, they're not even that generous. They want to snip us off the general election ballot too, and that's really rough. When we're excluded from debates, we're excluded from coverage. And now you see it's getting even worse with it. I don't know where you stand on the cancel culture stuff and all of this, because I know nobody wants to hear, the other side win. But if you're not allowed to hear the other side at all, that's a terrible, terrible thing. And must have an awfully weak argument if you can't allow the other people to speak. And what I'm seeing right now is just really scary when it comes to the Chinese have their social that the way they program people now is very similar to what Hitler actually complained about when they started when the early days of the secret police, and what became sort of all of the police organizations in Germany basically got conglomerated in about 1932-33. And they started using informants and even kids and like the Hitler Youth and all of that stuff. And Hitler, I wish I could remember the quote. He was talking to his interior minister, and he was talking about how terrible it was that the German people have turned, nasty and have been, turning on each other. When Hitler, with all of his, obviously there are horrible things about Hitler, but he really did have a vision for a better sort of a Germany than he was seeing right unfolding before him. And what happened with the snitching culture in Germany, the snitching culture we now see in China, and now this, if you see something, say something, advertising campaign paid for by the Department of Homeland Security, which started out with 9/11, but now they've co-opted it for COVID. I'm seeing the same thing happening where snip, snip, snip. Don't talk about that. You can't say that. You can't say this. You have to say this. You're only allowed, this truth and that truth. And so, yes, the media, but it's not just the commercial media anymore. It's not even just, like Facebook and the new media. It's us too. We're being programmed to snitch on each other and act like, body snatchers when we see somebody who's not wearing a mask. And that's got a bad precedent. So, media. Ooh, scary stuff.
It is something that I experienced, and I joke around about. There's more editing of my interviews on Channel 13's floor than there is carpet, because when the other guy was out there cutting ribbons or whatever, he gets full coverage, and there was strict orders not to cover anything that, say, another person. So they definitely direct that, and that's why we started our own media. So yep. I know Lucy's chomping at the bit to ask a question. So we're going to go to Jacob. So Jacob, you got a question?
Sorry, Lucy. Well done, John.
Yes, I got an interesting question. It kind of piggybacks off Ed's to an extent. And it also kind of relates to something that you were talking about in your initial monologue there, Andrew, is basically, do you think that a lot of people, because of the media and because of very hyper polarized media like we got now, like the Fox Newses and the MSNBCs, do you think, and talk radio and Facebook and the like, do you think that people kind of view politics almost more like how they would view sports? Like, say, you know, they view the Republicans and Democrats as the Bears and the Colts or something like that. And that maybe because they're rooting for, quote unquote, their team, they forget the bigger picture about fighting for ideals that are best for the country. And it all just becomes a self-preservation effort for fighting for my team and defeating the other team. Do you kind of get where I'm going with that?
Oh, I absolutely, yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. I think especially with the way we vote, with the winner takes all style voting, as opposed to something like, even instant runoff or approval voting, or there's several different means of voting that would not have the same effect. But because we have just one winner is all you get, and there's no, you can basically only pick one candidate for any sort of race. And there are different states that have different rules now, and some things are opening up a little, but that does almost necessarily make something like it's us versus them. And it's a tug of war that does have a sports element to it. And I, years ago, before a lot of, I think, I don't remember ever hearing anybody else talk about wearing like team jackets with sponsors and things on. I talked about that years ago because I thought we really should be covering politics like that. And even to the point where we talk about the money being passed under tables and stuff as part of the game strategy. It is a game, and people see it as a game. And when they're voting, they're doing this. It's stupid, but they're this lesser evil voting is game strategy. And if you're looking at game theory, there is unfortunately some sense to it because of the way our laws have been written, and because of the way we vote. There is a little bit of logic to it, unless you think about how we were actually supposed to use our vote against things and not for things. Politicians will elect themselves. They don't need to be elected. You have lots of politicians all throughout history that were not elected. They prop themselves up with guns and swords and whatever else they can, and then they don't need elections. What elections were supposed to be for is our weapon of peaceful revolution. And we were supposed to be voting the bums out. And so instead of voting for people so much, although it's nice to be able to vote for somebody, we really were supposed to be thinking long and hard about voting against people and structures. And, that's the idea. The idea is you want to be able to revolt without having to do what our founders did. You don't want to have to pick up guns and shoot the guys. It would be nice if we would just use our votes in the way we talk. And so if you hear how people talk every day except election day, they'll say, oh, my own party, they screw up all the time. Oh, I wish I didn't have to vote for Biden. I wish I didn't have to vote for Trump. But, the fact is they do vote for them. And one of the things that I heard for years and years and years that just made me grind my teeth is that, gosh, Andy, I wish I could vote for you. They'd say something like, I like you better than the guy that I'm going to vote for. And I want to grab them by the throat, but see, I'm a nonviolent person, so I can't do that. Yeah.
It is frustrating. And I think, a lot of it is educating. And I think this system is so convoluted, it's marketing, it's all this. People just give up. I think they just give up, and you really have to stay in the game. So Lucy,
yes,
last but not least, go ahead, and I know you're ready to go here. So
I want to take turns, but Andy, you always say what I'm thinking, and you say it with such higher class sounding words than I use. So I just figure I'd let Andy talk. But I want to speak about the marketing idea, the red versus blue programming. There's a guy I follow on social media. His name is Jason Christoff, and he talks a lot about self-sabotage and the programming that comes along with the red versus blue. You've got the sports teams, the AFL, the NFL, police cars are red and blue. So the authoritarian colors are red and blue that are ingrained in us at a very young age, even Pepsi and Coke, and it forces you to choose between two pre-selected options. So where Jason Christoph's theory goes with this, with the sports team specifically, because we have our own version of bread and circus here with UBI and the NFL, is that the slaves get their emotions out by living through the teams. And so the emotions that could be channeled, first of all, you've got the drudgery through the week, and they're living for the weekend. They're filling up on, beer or some sort of mind-altering substance to cheer on a team so that they can have some sort of sense of accomplishment through someone else. And by channeling those emotions for the slaves to that sort of really irrelevant activity, it keeps the slaves from revolting against their masters. And so I would recommend anybody out there to watch two videos. One is the story of your enslavement. It's about 14 minutes. And the other is the Jones Plantation. Those are really good. And they'll explain a lot about what I just said.
I actually had not thought about that color thing that you were mentioning, but that's an interesting.
It becomes more obvious. Once somebody says that to you, you're like, crap, it's everywhere. It's red versus blue. Yeah, even with the AFL and the NFL.
And we have a world of duality. You have good and evil, and we have all of that stuff. It is that way. Our job, I think, as people is to discern what doesn't harm someone else, what helps someone else, and what betters ourselves to be a better person. And I think if you use those three ideals, then you could do better. But somebody that's not using those will run over you. So be careful with that. But Lucy, I don't think you asked a question, by the way. I just wanted to point that out.
Well, maybe I'll just ask Andy. First of all, do you plan on running again? This is a two-part question. Sorry to put you on the spot. I had to. Is Wendell around? She's gonna pull it out. Here, I'll slap myself for Wendell. And then the second question is, do you share the same frustration I did? Because people wouldn't vote for us, even though they were clearly the better candidate, because of the lack of support. And they say, well, nobody's supporting you. You're not getting donations. Like, it's very simple. I'm not offering fraud. I have no fraud to exchange once I get elected for the money that's going to come in now.
What do you do about that? I have all kinds of questions that I want to ask voters. What are you thinking about? You say every day when you're not talking about actually voting, everybody talks about the influence of money in politics. Everybody sees that the donations that go into politics have strings attached. They know that. It's not like there's no secret to it. People have done studies, and you could put a numeric advantage to making campaign contributions. You get a tremendous, you buy stock and you can get a pretty good return on your investment. You can buy, some cryptocurrency, and you can maybe make a killing on it. But if you give $1 million to a candidate, you're going to get $1 billion back. And that's almost guaranteed. And what's frustrating is everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. And yet they vote for it every election day. How do you get this into people's heads? I mean, you can tell them what they know, and they will be nodding. And they will say, gosh, you're right. You're right. You're right. And they'll be tick down the list. You'll be saying all this stuff, and they'll say, you're right. But I can't vote the way I'm thinking.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's the tell lie vision. It is programming. How many instances have you seen in your life? And by the way, the second video is The Jones Plantation by Larkin Rose. But how many times in your life do you say something to somebody, it goes right over their head, and then they repeat whatever was said on CNN or Fox?
Yes.
They literally repeat what has been programmed into them.
And that will be by tribe. But then there's also another thing. I don't mean to pick on anybody who is on the, on your man on the street thing. But there's the other part to this. If you don't feed them the question exactly the way it was framed by CNN or Fox or whatever, then you will get answers like, I don't know. And they'll say, do you think the two-party system is a good thing? And they'll say, yeah, I think it's a good thing. But if you ask them specific questions, do you think the two-party system is corrupt? They'll say, yeah, absolutely. It's horribly corrupt. They'll say, do you think the corporations have bought off our government? And they'll say, yeah. And then I think it's kind of funny that you've got Democrats who think that, that corporations have bought our government, and that's bad. Of course it's bad. You have Republicans who think our government sold our government to corporations. And yes, that's bad. And what's stupid is they're both right, but they're not looking at the core issue, that our government is for sale and people are buying it. And so
Right.
they're voting for the fact that our government is for sale and people are buying it. And they're voting for the fact that we are not being represented because we're not the ones who are funding campaigns. So, our votes are important. Our votes could turn everything around, but our votes have been bought off too. So, the same thing happens to us that, we say happened to our politicians. So, I say, well, Andy, you don't have enough support. You don't have $1 million. Well, dang it. God.
Well, give me $1 million and then I'll have it.
Well, it's not even that. Why should it even cost $1 million? These people don't listen to debates. They don't show up to public forums when they can actually interrogate these people. They don't do job interviews. So if you were going to hire a janitor or a cook or anybody, you would want to at least see them face to face. You would ask them, can you cook? Can you work a mop? Do you know which end to hold? And so we don't do that with our politicians at all. And you think about how that would be a cheap way to run elections. And you would actually be able to see, well, I don't want to vote for this guy because he doesn't even know which end of the mop to hold. So, that's the kind of thing that if we had any sense, if we thought, that's why I talked about this abstraction thing right off the bat. If we thought about politics the way we think about anything else in the world, if we thought about politics the way we think about cars, we would research a car before we bought a car. If we like coffee, we're going to look to see, do I like, light roast, dark roast? Do I want to get it ground first? Do I want to put mine in the freezer? There's all this stuff you think about with coffee, but we don't think like that about politics. We don't think about politics the way we think about socks or anything. And if only we could just dissect away that abstraction and start thinking in real terms about what the heck we're doing.
I can't. I'm sorry, and Lucy's husband is ate up. He really.
What did I miss?
Todd Young is shorter than a mop. How does that work? That's quite enough. But on a serious note, our viewer Adam, and we can get this up. That was good, Dorn. You're a character. I'm gonna tell you what. What election form do you think would be most effective for giving alternative parties candidates a good chance? So our audience is sharp here. They have good questions.
Well, there's kind of two parts to this question, unfortunately, because there's the today answer, and then there's more or less the long-term answer. You can't get the long-term answer unless you do the short-term answer first. So you can't have term limits until you get rid of incumbents. You can't have, new ballot access laws until you get rid of the party structure. So, essentially the first thing we have to, there's no getting around the fact. We have to vote this system down. We have to get rid of the two-party system. And the only way to do that is to vote it away. The whole point of elections, as I said before, is our power of peaceful revolution. We need that revolution. And without that revolution, whatever you say you want, I hear people talking about, Article 5 convention, I want to have a convention of states, and they want to amend the Constitution. They haven't even read the Constitution. They don't even know what it is they want. They have some nebulous idea about changing things for the better, but they're going to have the same people that mucked everything up right now make those changes. That's stupid. So, the bottom line is there is no change possible until we change. So, I guess the ugly truth of everything related to politics is that it is us. And that, all government, whether we like to think so or not, is in one way or another by consent of the governed. Not all of us, not me individually, but collectively. Our choices are a perfect representation of our ignorance and sloth and fear and hate. And so, our wars, our racism, our, all of the things that are bad about politics is us. We vote for it. And
Yep.
you see every election day. In fact, it was what I think is trying to think back when the federal reelection rates dropped below 90%. I think it was back in the 1980s, early 1980s. So we have had reelection rates above 90%, and recently, like 96 to 98% for the House of Representatives for years. And yet you have what's the approval rate of Congress? It's single digits. Reelection rate is 98%. That disconnect is us. So there is no getting around the fact that there is no change possible until we change. We have to change that reelection rate. We have to change the fact that we vote for only Democrats and Republicans and don't give anybody else a shot. So,
Now, I got a question. It does seem like that our choices have been limited because of this two-party structure, because you have to be able to battle your way through that structure to be able to even get your shot at things. And you mentioned earlier when if someone quits during an election, they have a caucus, and then the party gets to sort of pick another person that really nobody really elected other than this group of people. And generally that's all been determined before the vote even is counted. So they don't come to debates. They don't be accessible. They don't have room. What's that saying Abraham Lincoln maybe said? If you're a fool, don't open your mouth and prove it, something like that. So I think that's sort of the mentality they have. The less people know, the more they'll like them. Do you concur with that?
Right.
well, if you have somebody like, I hate to mention any particular names like Representative Bouchon, for instance, but if you don't show up, if you hide for the whole election cycle, you're going to win, and you hide because you're not if everything you say can be a mistake, it can be heard the wrong way, or it can be heard by the wrong person. If you actually do have an opinion, which is not something a lot of politicians have anymore, there's no value to it. And in fact, I guess I have to say, one of the most frustrating things also is that there is no disadvantage to being wrong in politics. There's no demerit in being wrong and no advantage to being right. So if you're right, like a Ron Paul was right about lots of stuff. Oh, he was a wacko though. And you have people, you have innumerable people in politics who seem like they're always wrong about everything, and yet they keep getting reelected. And so it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. And if you've got any opinions at all, it's probably best to just hide them, because you're going to turn off somebody with that. And one of those things that people said about Barack Obama, and he agreed with, by the way, was that he was a tabula rasa. People, thought of him as a blank slate, and they put their own ideas about what he was going to be like onto him. So he was going to, make everything free, and I wasn't going to have to pay rent anymore, and we were going to have peace, and I was going to have lots of money, and all of this stuff that you can just imagine, as long as he doesn't say anything to contradict that. And he sounded great. He was a fine speaker, great voice. He looked good. And what else do you need? And so, you've got somebody like Biden. Everybody knows he's just full of gaffes, and he said ridiculous, racist, horrible things all the time. But he hid. He hid this last election. He didn't expose himself very much. And so he was able to win, not only because he hid, but because they have this business of superdelegates, which is a new concept that's extremely powerful, and it's very anti-democratic, where you've got some people whose votes count way more than other people's votes, and that you've got bundlers who can hide massive amounts of money and make huge campaign funds, and everybody who pays attention knows this. But you have two big groups of people. The people who know better than the way they vote, and the people who don't know better than the way they vote. And what when you've got half the people are by definition below average, and most of the rest of us are badly misinformed, we've got a real problem with this two-party system where only one choice is going to make it, and we have only two choices. You can't get a good outcome out of that. You just numerically, mathematically, you can't get a good outcome, especially when you're voting for a lesser evil that tends to be more and more evil.
And that's basically what my question was. Okay, so I'm going to go over the poll things, and we're going to have the last couple comments here, and then we're going to go to the conspiracy theory. Are you going to stick around for that, Andrew? Or you have a conspiracy theory you want to throw out there tonight?
No, I'd rather listen. I want to hear. I'm ready to listen now.
Okay, all right. So our poll questions this week were one was, do you think any of the party chairs, we extended an invitation to the state Democrat and the state Republican chair. That was Kyle Hupfer and Mike Schummel. He's the newly elected Democrat chair, and the vote was none for him. And then Joe Elzer and Kate Sweeney Bell. Kate Sweeney Bell being the Democrat, and Joe Elzer being the newly elected Republican chair in Marion County. None of those folks got a vote. Kyle Hupfer got 4 votes that he would show up, and then 22 votes for none. So those people that voted for none, they were correct. The other question was, do you think leadership of the political parties are for insiders only? We had 15 yes, 1 no, 1 not sure. Then the other question was, do you think the two-party political system works for the people? And that was 27 no, 2 yes, 8 sometimes, and 1 only if it keeps them in power. So that's our questions. And across the bottom there, you see the ticker. It will tell you how to join the People Over Politics group to be able to take these fine surveys to help us with our show. So, Andrew, would you like to address either of those questions or poll results with a comment? And does anyone else have a question? Just sort of jump right in.
The only comment I would have is that, of course, the political leadership is for insiders only. It's like, the leadership of the Ford Motor Company is for Ford Motor Company. It's not for Chevy. So, these are, as Mark Small talked about, these are corporations. They're corporate entities. They're chartered. And so they've got, their organizational rules. We can't even see what those organizational rules are. They don't have stockholders. So they are more than any publicly traded corporation, only for insiders. And that's pretty much by definition.
Yeah, and that's you'll find that, and it seems like if you can weasel your way up through there without making up ruffling feathers and do your work and pay your dues, and you're connected. Those are the things that I've noticed that happens. If you're an outsider, that's not a good thing. So hey, I knew this hour would fly by, and he's just such a vast, knowledgeable person to have on here about the Constitution, about a lot of things. I like the expression when Lucy asked you if you were going to run again, because I already knew the answer when I interviewed you before. I don't think your wife would let you. It's like, hey, brother, I know the feeling. It is like beating your head against the wall. It is, it's something that it's like looking at the sun. Boy, it's pretty, but it sure doesn't hurt. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to the conspiracy theory. So we're going to make this into all people like this. Oh, look at this. I'm sort of in the middle. We'll keep you on air here so we can watch your facial expressions. And that's going to wind it up. Thank you for those in the audience that asked questions. Very good chat going on. So we're going to go to our little segment break here, and we'll come right back with our conspiracies. Hey, y'all, it's time for the conspiracy theory, so you better get your tinfoil hat out, and let's see what's going on this week. All right. Look at us go here. We're like pros at this.
You didn't tell me I needed to get it. Oh man,
I'm
underdressed.
The guests don't have to have a tinfoil hat. You just have to have a conspiracy. So, if you have a conspiracy, then you don't need a hat. Because
government is a conspiracy.
This keeps the conspiracy from going in your head. That's what the tinfoil hat's for. Okay, so maybe our people should. And then let's see who we're going to start with tonight. Raise your hand if you want to go first. All right, Ed. Oh no, Lucy's going to go first. She loved this. Conspiracy fact.
Yeah, I thought I had the buzzer faster.
You
Okay,
did.
so I like to do conspiracy facts rather than conspiracy theories, things that are just so egregious that you just cannot even believe that they did. And tonight, because it's all about.
The NSA is blanking Lucy.
Yeah, really. This conspiracy.
Either that or it's the.
Yeah, maybe it's your Lucy in the sky with diamonds hat.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to be nice and shiny. So I want to hit on racism, misogyny, and the conspiracy among medical professionals and corporate profits, those evil pharmaceutical companies. So I submit to you the story of Henrietta Lacks, an otherwise ordinary sharecropper, Black woman back in the 50s, who unfortunately came down with the most virulent form of cervical cancer ever witnessed, evidently in the history of mankind. And from the time of her diagnosis to the time of her death was apparently less than 120 days. This is a woman who had 5 kids. So, anybody with, kids is going to be after my own heart, especially a mom. What happened with Henrietta? Well, she was Black, strike one, and female, strike two. And the medical profession, of course, looked at her cervix and said, I bet we could make some money of that. So for those of you who don't know, one of the problems with cancer cells is unlimited cell growth. And so what they discovered with Henrietta Lacks is that these cervical cells are so virulent because they kept manufacturing telomerase. And so as a result, her cancer cells never die. Now, this has some wide-ranging implications, one of which in research is that, you can't get to multiple generations to see the mutations or the changes without having a cell line that will also go the distance for you. And to grow her cells. Now, they called them HeLa cells for years. Many people didn't know that was because her name was Henrietta Lacks. And the companies that have stolen her cervix without her family's knowledge or permission have literally made hundreds of billions of dollars off of the cells. Now, that's not the most horrifying thing, although that's pretty damn bad. The most horrifying thing is that most of the biologics that each of us have taken in our lifetimes may have been grown on the cell line of the most virulent cancer cells in mankind's history. Back at you. Oh, and read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Great book on Amazon, Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. You will be horrified and mad.
This was supposed to be a fun segment, Lucy. That was a little dark side-ish. I mean, should I play the Darth Vader music now from that? So, hey, who wants to go? Who wants to go next after that? Hopefully, we.
How do you follow that?
The Swami. Go right ahead, Jacob.
Alrighty. Well, my one is kind of about a current event we're having right now. Now, I'm sure you all have heard about the gas line issue going on in the eastern states right now. And my conspiracy theory is that basically the government, the CIA, whoever you want to talk about, the deep state, they came in there and they purposely orchestrated a shutdown of the pipeline specifically because they do not want people to go out and have fun on Memorial Day. The people in the CIA hate Memorial Day barbecues more than anything. They hate seeing you laugh and get together with your family and have a good time. So they said, we're cutting off the gas. No traveling for Memorial Day this year.
Oh, I thought that we had a gas shortage because they closed all the Taco Bells.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Ed, what do you have so far?
I'm going to say Jacob took my kneecaps out because I was going with the same thing, but I was blaming Meg Whitmer for it. So, yes.
See, that's why it's important for us to have everyone on our production meeting. But so I got a conspiracy for you, and this is sort of party related here in Indiana. So this is my conspiracy is that, the Republicans and the Democrats get together and decide who they're going to run for which office. So they decide that, for the mayor's race, we're going to get a guy that is, we're going to get a guy that are both fraternity brothers that graduated from the IU at the same time. And then we're going to have them sort of run a race. Like one's going to be like really bad and the other one's going to do this. And then one's going to say something about abandoned homes. And the other guy's going to come out the very next day with 2 chicks and a hammer and say they're renovating that home the next day. Oh, and then for governor, we're going to get a guy. We're going to get a guy in there on the Democrat side that he can barely walk. I saw the guy out; he can barely walk. And let's run him. Let's run that guy, and then we'll see how this works out. So that's my conspiracy. I don't think there's much truth to it, but I just went with it anyway. So there you go. And
I have one.
Okay,
we've been talking about it all night. And that's
Okay.
the whole nature of the 2-party system is a conspiracy theory. The fact that they have joined arms and locked
Bingo.
arms against the rest of us, that was a conspiracy in the most literal sense. And it's not even a theory; they wrote it down. So,
remember, this is
They're proud of it.
yeah.
I need to put here we go. This is the disclaimer for this on here. We'll probably all be kicked out of our respective parties except for the libertarians on here tonight. So,
I'll get a bonus.
remember, folks, this is all opinions matter here on this show. This is a civil talk show that's a minty fresh take on politics, which this show had a little bad breath tonight on some of our topics. Well, hey. That's going to do it for episode 14. It was awesome. And I appreciate you, Andrew. And Mark Small's already gone. And our panel of great panelists here with excellent questions and our lovely studio audience that ask questions. Stay tuned next week where we have a pretty good little show for you next week. And I think it's going to be very interesting. So thanks for tuning in. You all, and we will see you next week live, 9:00 on Tuesday. Thanks, Andrew. See you, Ed. See you, Lucy. See you, Jacob.